Hi guys, welcome to another lesson. Today we are talking about the Kingdom Protista. Now the protists are a group of organisms that are eukaryotes. What do we mean by eukaryotes? The eukaryotes are organisms that possess definite or defined nucleus, and they also possess membrane-bound organelles. So we've discussed what prokaryotes are now in our previous videos. Now today we are talking about the protists, which are a group of eukaryotes. So the eukaryotes is just the opposite of the prokaryotes. The prokaryotes do not have a definite nucleus. The eukaryotes have a definite nucleus. So all the eukaryotes that are not fungi, animals, or plants are found under the Kingdom Protista. So all the other eukaryotes, apart from the fungi, the animals, or the plants, are the protists. Now, because of this, the protist is a very large kingdom of diverse groups of organisms. Despite that, these organisms do not really have much in common, except a relatively simple organization. So we'll be talking about the different organisms or the different phyla or groups found under this kingdom and their characteristics. So before we talk about the characteristics of each phylum found under this kingdom, we'll be talking about the broad characteristics, the general characteristics that each of these different divisions have in common. One is that they have well-organized DNA in the nucleus, which is bounded by nuclear membrane. So they have a well-organized DNA that is inside the nucleus and is now bounded by a nuclear membrane. That is one characteristic. Another one is that they are single-celled organisms, or they are unicellular organisms, which means they possess a single cell, and that single cell is the whole organism. So another characteristic is that some are motile while some are non-motile, which means some can move while the others cannot move. Another characteristic is that they could live in water, damp soil, leaf litter, and other terrestrial habitats that have sufficient water or that are moist. Another one is that all protists make use of mitochondrion for cellular respiration. They use the mitochondrion found in their cell for cellular respiration. Another one is that they form cysts to survive adverse conditions. They form a structure called a cyst to protect them from adverse conditions. It could be adverse weather conditions or conditions that they do not have sufficient food or sufficient sunlight or sufficient water. So they form cysts to survive this kind of conditions. Now, all the organisms found under this kingdom could reproduce either sexually or asexually. So some of them reproduce sexually, which involves the fusion of gametes, while some reproduce asexually, which does not involve the fusion of gametes. Now, the organisms or the examples of organisms found under this kingdom include amoeba, euglena, chlamydomonas, and plasmodium. Now let's talk about the different divisions or the different phyla found under this Kingdom Protista. So the two phyla under Kingdom Protista are one, phylum Protozoa and phylum Euglenophyta. Those are the two phyla we'll be talking about majorly. There are several other smaller divisions like the phylum Protophyta and some other ones, but majorly for this class we'll be talking about the phylum Protozoa and the phylum Euglenophyta. Now, the characteristics of the organisms found under phylum Protozoa. One is that they reproduce asexually by binary fission. So the organisms under this phylum reproduce asexually, and the means of asexual reproduction that they make use of is binary fission. It's an example or a type of asexual reproduction. Another one is that they are mainly aquatic organisms, while a few of them are parasitic. So most of them are aquatic, but some of them are also parasitic. Parasitic organisms live on or in hosts, other organisms, to survive. So aquatic organisms live on water. So some of them are aquatic, while others are parasitic. Now, another one is that the organisms in this group move by different organelles. What we mean by this is that they have different structures that they make use of for movement. For example, the amoeba move by pseudopodia, while the paramecium moves by cilia. Now, the examples of the protozoa include amoeba, paramecium, trypanosome, plasmodium, and the list goes on and on. Now, let's talk about the next phylum under the Kingdom Protista, under the protists. The next phylum is phylum Euglenophyta, and the major organism under this is just one single organism, which is Euglena. Now, Euglena is a typical example of an organism that shares both characteristics of an animal and a plant. It's a microscopic unicellular aquatic organism. What we mean by this is that an Euglena has some characteristics of animals, characteristics that are generally seen as characteristics of animals, and it also has some characteristics that are generally seen as characteristics of plants. So, and it is a microscopic organism, which means we can't see it with the naked eyes, and it's a unicellular organism, which means it has a single cell. It's also aquatic, which means it is found in water. Now, let's talk about the characteristics of Euglena that makes us to classify it as an animal, or what characteristics that are generally seen as characteristics that belong to animals. Number one is that they possess flagellum. So the Euglena possesses flagellum, which is used for movement. It makes use of a structure called flagellum for movement. It's a whip-like structure. Now, another characteristic is that they possess gullets, which is used for the passage of food. So they have a gullet which food can pass through. Another one is that they possess contractile vacuole, which is used for osmoregulation and excretion. What do we mean by this? They have a structure called the contractile vacuole, and that contractile vacuole is used for osmoregulation. Osmoregulation is just simply the processes that organism goes through to maintain the internal environment of that organism. So they have a vacuole used for that, and also that vacuole is also used for excretion, and excretion is just the removal of excess of waste products that could be harmful to the body. Now, the Euglena also possess eye spot, which enables it to detect light intensity. So Euglena has eye spot, which helps it to detect light that is in its environment. So this is also an animal characteristic. Another one is that the Euglena possesses a pellicle, which makes its body flexible or gives it a definite body shape. So that's another characteristic. And another one is that the Euglena possesses myonemes, which aid in the movement. So myonemes help in the movement of Euglena from one place to another, which is also another animal characteristic. Now, let's talk about the plant characteristics of Euglena. What are the characteristics of Euglena that are generally seen as plant-like characteristics? One is the possession of chloroplast, which enables it to carry out photosynthesis. Chloroplast is a structure in plants that contains chlorophyll, which is used for photosynthesis or autotrophic nutrition, which is the making of food of an organism by itself. Another characteristic, which is seen as plant-like, is the possession of pyrenoid, in which starch is stored. Generally, plants store starch store excess starch in their body, but Euglena stores excess starch specifically in the pyrenoid. It has that structure for the storing of starch, and it stores this starch in forms of paramylum granules. It stores starch in the form of paramylum granules. So those are the major characteristics of the organisms found under phylum Euglenophyta. With that, we've come to the end of today's class. Next lesson, we'll be talking about another kingdom in the classification of living things. See you next class.